It's season 8 and I have some cracking guests lined up. We'll be diving into all things leadership, teamwork, engagement, mental well-being and high performance. We have the conversations that matter about putting the human factor back into business, because when we get people right, we get business right. If you want to find out more about how to develop an experience that brings out the best in people, get in touch. And if you like the idea of building your leaders, managers and culture, one experiment at a time, Leadership Labs may well be for you. Check out details in the show notes. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. So this is the first time I'm getting to speak to my guest today, who is Daniel Glyde, life coach and founder of Positive Masculinity. And from the probably 8 minutes we've spoken so far off air, I can tell this is going to be a cracker of an episode because he's got lots to say, likes talking.
Oh, Lisa, you set me up now.
I like to set the bar high. We have talked a lot about Scotland, well, in the 8 minutes we've had, and about how you live in the middle of nowhere, which sounds bliss.
It is, yeah. So I live in a lovely valley called the Yarrow Valley. It's about an hour south of Edinburgh. It's in the Scottish borders. It was a very deliberate move. So I've bought a 200-year-old stone shepherd's cottage, which is lovely, but a lot of work and constant work. And I have 12 acres of land. So the idea is to be as sustainable and self-sufficient as possible. We've started growing our own fruit and veg at the moment. The next step will be to start producing our own energy. So the only thing we get from the grid is electricity at the moment. So we have our own water supply and our own heating. And yeah, it was all about having a slower pace of life, peace, tranquility, that sort of thing, because previously I was living my life at 100 miles an hour and eventually it led to me burning out.
Have you watched Clarkson's Farm?
No, no, I haven't. And you're not the first person to recommend it, but I cannot stand Jeremy Clarkson. So
No,
I've never watched it. And my wife, we had literally had this conversation last night, Lisa, because the promo came up again, and she said, "Come on, let's just give it a go." Everyone says it doesn't matter about just, and I'm like, no, I'm not watching anything with that man in it.
You know what? So I'm the same camp as you in terms of I can't stand him, but someone told me to watch an episode, the second episode of this current series, and it was hilarious, and it kind of puts him in his place in terms of what farming, what being sort of sustainable is all about, and so yeah, so if you can manage to pull yourself towards having a look, watch the second episode, something to do with pigs. I'm not going to say anything more than that.
Okay.
But anyway, so you and I got connected via Jamie Humphrey of Reach Us Wellbeing.
Yes.
An awesome company has just launched, and I had the privilege of talking to Jamie on my podcast really recently. A really inspiring guy. So he recommended I think you connected me on LinkedIn and he sung your praises and you said he's amazing. And I was like, I got to speak to this Daniel chap. And I invited you because you talk a lot about well-being, but from a perspective which is about men being able to talk authentically, and to be able to be themselves and be authentic in terms of how they are. So tell us more about that sort of focus, that positive masculinity focus and well-being.
Yeah, but I mean, it comes from my own journey, Lisa, because I had real long-term mental health struggles. I had chronic anxiety for a long time, not that I realized it at the time. And I suffered a lot with stress and occasional bouts of depression, not full-on clinical suicidal depression, but kind of mild, couldn't get out of bed, lost all motivation, very apathetic type depression. And when I it eventually led to me burning out back in the start of 2018. And I've kind of rebuilt my life and changed everything about it since then. And what I realized was that, one, I had no idea I had poor mental health because there just was no information out there. So I'm always someone who's read and learned and wants to be the best version of myself. But I had no idea that that's what I was suffering with, that my problems were poor mental health. And it struck me that the reason I had no idea was because I was a man.
Mm.
And it was all about how I'd been brought up and how I was trying to be in the world, following a kind of prescribed idea of what a man should be like. And the first and most evil thing that I'd taken on as a belief was that I had to be self-reliant, that I had to shoulder my own burdens, that I couldn't share those with anybody else, and I shouldn't share those with anybody else. It was my responsibility. And I think that's what really caused my anxiety. And I probably thought at the time I was fairly emotionally intelligent, but I wasn't. I was emotionally backward because, again, as a man of my generation, I'd been brought up that the only emotion you can share is anger. So all of my emotions were expressed as anger. Any that weren't expressed stayed with me, and they caused me problems because they were repressed and buried. I became a very skilled avoider of how I felt. So I would use some quite horrible and destructive habits to bring me short-term pleasure, and to avoid how I felt, to make me feel better in the moment. I used to tell myself stories about I'll be happy when. So there was always some mythical time in the future I was aiming for when I was finally going to be able to go, and let it all go. Of course, that never arrived. And it was only when I was floored by burnout that I suddenly took the time to really look at what was going on for me and what was happening. And as I rebuilt my life and I got help and I got therapy and counseling and eventually coaching, which I'm now absolutely addicted to
Mm.
because I'm convinced coaching will change the world, um, that I realized what had happened to me and why. And I looked around me and I saw that so many men were going through exactly the same things. And it's normalized. That's the frightening thing, Lisa, in our society. It's normalized. And often it's worn as a badge of honor. They wear their stress as a badge of honor. Look how successful I am. I'm so successful that I'm just constantly stressed.
Mm.
And that leads to heart attacks, that leads to bad relationships and divorces. And um, you know, I speak to so many guys who have that I'll be happy when thing, really successful blokes with everything society says they should have. And they tell me, oh, Dan, I'm going to retire in 5 years. I'll be happy then. And it's like, mate, you might not even make it 5 years. You might have a heart attack or a stroke in the meantime, or something else that debilitates you. Or you might find you come home one day and your wife's left you because you're not much fun to be around because you're constantly irritable and you're constantly stressed and you're never present because what I remember from when I had anxiety is I couldn't switch off, Lisa. I could
Mm.
never switch off. Even on holiday, I would be answering work phone calls and emails, and because I thought that's what success meant. I thought that's how you were successful. I worked for the BBC. I was a broadcaster. I loved my job. I worked in sports broadcasting. I would have done anything to get ahead and get where I wanted to be, including sacrificing my own well-being.
Mm. You know what? It's so just listening to you talk then, Danny, was so interesting because this week as we record this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and I
Yeah.
just what you were saying about when you were struggling with your mental health, you didn't recognize you were struggling with your mental health,
Mm.
and I think there's a massive disconnect between what is being promoted within organizations this week in particular, in terms of there's always stuff around mental health and there's this help available and that help available and so on. And I still think there are a lot of people, but perhaps more men, who are looking at going, that's not me. That doesn't relate to me. Like I don't need any of that stuff
Yeah,
because
and that's exactly what
I'm
I'd have
a
done,
performer.
Lisa.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I'd have done. And the BBC does a lot of that type of well-being stuff. Some of it's a bit ticking boxes, but there's a lot of resources I could have used. There's a lot of support there I could have used. But I just thought this is the stresses and strains of having a high-powered, high-performance career, right? I thought it
Mm.
was normal. I thought it was normal to be stressed. I thought it was normal to have sleepless nights. I thought it was normal for my digestion not to work properly. I thought it was normal to have headaches and tense shoulders and walking around with a clenched jaw the whole time. I just thought that was normal. Um, and so I wouldn't ever think I was having mental health problems. You know, my brother suffers with mental illness, which is a different thing. He has like an OCD type thing that he has to manage. And that's what I thought poor mental health looked like. And I thought, well, that's not me. You know, I'm not being obsessive or doing anything unusual behavior, anything like that. But poor mental health and mental illness are completely different things. And I think that's the key. And this is what a lot of blokes that I talk to, because every client I've worked with, Lisa, has suffered with anxiety in some way, shape, or form. Not one of them would have recognized it. Not one of them came to me saying, Dan, I'm suffering with anxiety. Please help me. They came to me because their relationships are poor. They come to me because they can't sleep. They come to me because they keep finding they're losing their temper really quickly and for no apparent reason. They're finding everything really frustrating. Aggravation is a word I hear a lot when I talk to them, and they're aggravated by what they're seeing on the telly, by the new generation who are living their lives slightly differently, by people driving badly on the road, by their staff, by technology not working. That's poor mental health. Those things should not be winding you up to the point of losing your temper. And if they are, and regularly, that's poor mental health.
So, what would your advice? Because just listen to you then talking about actually it's the symptoms of poor mental health. So, for example, people struggling with their relationships, not being able to switch off and sleep properly, and so on. That's the stuff that will eventually, hopefully, prompt someone to say, actually, I'm struggling, I need to go and get some help, rather than, are you experiencing anxiety? Are you experiencing stress? Because those labels are laden with what we think about, in terms of our beliefs and our thoughts and our understanding.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to companies then who have very, very good intentions, particularly this week, to say, we're really going to put good mental health up there at the top of the agenda and remind everyone of all this amazing help that we can provide, and where people can go to get support, and that we can talk about it, and so to show their intentions really good, but they potentially are missing the point if they're just talking about things like stress and anxiety and so on, because people say that's not me. Do you have advice that you say to sort of leaders in organizations, actually this is the better way of approaching it, so people do go, oh, actually that is me and I could benefit from talking to someone?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say train your leaders to recognize the signs in other people. As I say, when I work for the BBC, um, I've seen this everywhere in the people working there, but it's normal. We would work weeks on end without days off. We were resilient characters. We had to deliver live TV. We were watching sport and getting paid, so it was a privilege to do what we did. But if the leaders there could spot the signs, could see, when someone comes in tired and they've clearly not slept properly, when someone's moaning about everybody else and blaming everybody else, when somebody is drinking pints of Gaviscon every day because their digestion isn't working properly, when someone's skin looks bad, they're getting eczemas and things like that. These are the signs that you've got poor mental health. So train your leaders in how to spot that stuff, in how anxiety and stress shows up in people, and that'll be different in different sorts of people. It'd be different in men and women. It'd be different in slightly younger people, slightly older people. But that's what they need to know, right? Telling people about stress and anxiety is all well and good, but most people don't really know what that means. They don't really know how that shows up in people's lives. And I think that's what's key. Now, I talk a lot about this stuff, Lisa, but I never badge it as mental health, because I know particularly men will see that mental health thing, think, not me, not me, not me. When actually they are very stressed and they can't sleep and their digestion's bad and they're getting the physical symptoms. And that was the thing I really noticed about myself, Lee. So I've always been really good at looking after myself physically. I'm very active. I'm very sporty. I was 2 stone overweight for about a year. No real reason for that other than poor mental health. Your physiology and your nervous system does funny things when you're out of whack like that. And I feel like mine was kind of constantly feeling unsafe, so therefore was holding on to body fat, thinking, oh, we might starve soon because the nervous system is saying we're unsafe, because I constantly felt unsafe. I was constantly anxious, but it just felt normal. So yes, step one is train your leaders to spot this stuff, and then train them how to have proper conversations with people. And particularly men, because men really are, and especially men of our generation. I think it's better now, Lisa. I look at my son's generation, he's 24. He talks to me about this stuff. He talks to me when he's feeling anxious. He gets it, he spots it, he talks about it. My generation, we don't. We don't get it, we don't spot it, we don't talk about it. So you have to know how to approach people, how to get them to open up, and how to have a conversation, and how to put it in a way that's not going to close them down. I think the minute you mention things like mental health, it closes people down. So you have to find better ways. And I've had to do this in my marketing lead. So I've had to find ways to talk about these things to get through to these guys so they come and sit in front of me and talk to me without closing them down and making them think, no, this is not me, this is not me. So yeah, I think that's what is important. And I'm going to say a phrase here that I don't particularly like, but safe spaces.
Mm.
And I think that is the key, is places where people feel psychologically safe and can have open and honest conversations. So that's all about the culture within your workplace. That's you have to cultivate that kind of that psychological safety. Now, if you talk to men about safe spaces, they're going to switch off.
Mm.
Again, men don't want safe spaces, but what men do want is camaraderie. They do want support. They do want people who think and act and behave like them, people who've been through the same things. So that's where you've got to make sure you can offer people that understand, people that get it.
Mm. So is that why? Because I was going to ask you why you don't like that phrase "safe spaces." Is that because it switches a lot of men off?
Yeah, it's exactly that. You know, it is exactly what men need.
Yeah, yeah.
It is. We need. I think some people call it a third place, where somewhere where men can be together, have that banter and that camaraderie that we love as men, but also where we can be open and supported and vulnerable, which is
Mm.
key. But don't call them safe spaces, because
No, and
as a man myself, right, and I'm quite clued into this stuff.
yeah,
I wouldn't go somewhere because it's a safe space. I
no.
really wouldn't.
But I think that's such a key point, and like you were saying about the language we use around mental health, so many organizations, leaders, individuals think that because they are trying to raise the profile of this and we're trying to do the right thing in this space, that we need to use this terminology to show that we are doing the mental health stuff. And I always tell them, just forget, don't use those words at all if it's going to put
Yeah.
people off. Use whatever language is going to make a difference. When I was working with a leadership team of it, was the board of a startup company, tech company recently. And if I'd gone anywhere near them talking about mental health, they wouldn't have let me in the room. They're like, we absolutely don't need that stuff. So we talked about high performance. And they're like, oh yeah, we need all this stuff because we are really amazing. We want to be the best in the space. So we talked about high performance, and we talked about the brain, and we talked about physiological impact, and it basically ended up having a conversation about mental health without talking about mental health per se. And I think for me that's
Yeah.
a really big, like a really big elephant in the room, that particularly when there's a focus on mental health, is that everyone jumps on the mental health thing but doesn't talk about what really makes the biggest difference in mental health, which is having the conversations about how we show up and how we relate to each other and how we normalize checking in and just talking about how we're feeling. Like
Yeah.
no big label, no big deal, no big, my gosh, we need to sit down and I need to create a special time to put aside. And actually just how are you doing? This is a starter, just like literally just that starting point. How are you doing? But really showing that interest in the answer, and making sure the body language is matching what you're hearing, and making sure that you are really focusing on what a person's saying and how they're engaging, what they're not saying, all that, what's happening in that moment, rather than it being this big focus, which is somewhere, it's missing the point, is somewhere over here.
Yeah, and I think, and the trouble is with when you talk about mental health, and I think it's a bit odd, really, that we have to have a mental health awareness week. But I don't dislike it because I think anything that means we sit, like you and I are sitting down, we're having this conversation now. If people are having conversations about this stuff, then that's a positive.
Mm.
But we shouldn't just have a week. This is always, it's just health. That's what
Mm.
it is. It's just health. Now we will, as a bunch of people in the office, we'll all happily sit down and talk about how we're doing these hikes and these swims and these bike rides and all this stuff we're doing to have good physical health. And what we need to be having more conversations about, and I love the phrase you used there, because this is one that men will listen to: high performance.
Mm.
Most men like that idea of being high performers, of being the best they can be. And maybe we need to talk more about mental fitness rather than mental health, because often when people talk about mental health, they're thinking of mental illness. And whilst mental illness is a real problem, this isn't what workplaces have got to be dealing with, right?
Mm.
If you have someone with a mental illness, they need the right support, they need proper qualified psychotherapy and all that stuff. But
Mm.
we're talking about having good mental health here, which is a different thing. This is about not, this is about being resilient and, not, because we're all going to feel pressure in our lives, Lisa, aren't we? Life throws us curveballs. If we are ambitious and we want to be successful people, we're going to have to go through challenges.
Mm.
We'll be living very dull lives if we didn't have challenges. So it needs to be a constant conversation,
Mm.
and we need to all be happy to be vulnerable, and especially men, and especially men that are leaders, because I've worked with some fantastic women bosses who were very vulnerable and very caring, but also very strong, and some of the best bosses I've had. I think it might be just me. I quite like working for women, but men need to be just a little bit more like that. And I'm not saying that we need men to be soft and more feminine and anything like that. We don't. We need men to be men. We need men to be strong. We need them to do all the things that men naturally do. But we need them to be able to do that in a vulnerable, empathetic, and compassionate way, to be
Mm.
approachable, to be happy to talk about their own challenges, about
Mm.
what they faced, and not see it as weakness, because it isn't weakness. We all go through it. There isn't one successful person in the world that hasn't been flawed at one time or another by a challenge. But yet my generation of men would never, ever, 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 ever admit that in a million years, because it was be somehow seen as weak. It's not. It's strength. It's the opposite. It's weak to hide it and pretend that it's not happening.
Because your passion for this is coming through so clearly. You know what you're saying then reminds me about sort of female leadership and male leadership and vulnerability. It reminds me of a book by Dr. Sean Andrews, The Power of Perception, and it's about the gender divide with emotional intelligence and leadership, and around how there was a time, and it'd be interesting actually to see, ask Sean whether this has changed now, but there was a time when women were trying to be much more like men as leaders.
Yeah.
Like we've got to be hard, and we've got to be, there's none of this emotional stuff that's all seen as a bit soft. And if I'm showing my emotion, I'm seen as a weak leader. And actually I think there's a real shift now potentially where men are admiring those characteristics of women. So rather than actually every women needs to be like men, actually there is a lot for male leaders to learn in terms of the sort of the compassion, the empathy,
Yeah.
just using that emotional intelligence that you've referred to.
Yeah. And I think we need to stop looking at them as either male or female qualities, because
Yeah.
it goes across the genders. And another phrase I really hate, Lisa, is soft skills.
Mm.
Oh, we need to develop our soft skill. I mean, which bloke is going to go, yeah, I want soft skills. Come, give me some soft skills. These are not soft skills. These are strong skills. These are skills that mean you can nurture people, that you can build connections and relationships. 20th century command and control leadership is done. It does not work. We can all see it does not work. So we need leaders with soft skills. We need leaders with compassion and empathy and vulnerability. That's not soft skills. They are strong skills.
Can I just, that's funny you brought that up, because I wrote a post saying exactly that on LinkedIn a number of months ago. and it had massive traction. Like everyone was like saying exactly that. It's like there's nothing soft about this. This is hard to get right, but it's absolutely worth getting right.
Mm.
And there was so much talk around it that I ended up jumping on and recording an episode on this podcast. I'll put the links to all these things we're referencing in the show notes. But we recorded a podcast on soft skills. The fact that soft skills are not soft at all. It's the stuff that we absolutely need, and we have to be able to role model to other people in terms of the language we're using, in terms of our vulnerability, and challenge when people are stepping outside of what we're wanting to normalize now in terms of how we communicate. So, for example, the other day, someone, a really good friend of mine, said to her son, who was upset about something, "Man up." And I grabbed my friend. I was like, what do you mean by man up? He said, well, because he's crying and I want him to stop crying and I want him to um, you know, toughen up a bit." And we just talked about that terminology. I was like, I don't know where you've been for the last however many months, years, whatever, but actually we don't use terminology like that anymore, because if you're using that expression, you're teaching your son that actually he shouldn't show his emotion. If he's
Yeah.
upset about something,
There's something wrong with crying.
there's
Crying
nothing wrong with crying.
is a natural thing
Yeah,
to do. We
yeah,
need to do it.
exactly. So I was like, actually, if we're crying or if we're angry, if we're worried, whatever our emotional response is, it's a normal
It's
response.
okay.
It's
Yeah.
okay. And actually, we need to be, think about the messaging. And it wasn't that she didn't care about this. She just never thought of it. And so it goes back to the point you've made about normalizing the conversations around when we hear stuff, it's okay to challenge. When we hear stuff that doesn't feel quite right, for someone to say, "Oh, that makes me feel uncomfortable," or "Are you aware of what that's communicating?" And to call each other out. A lot
Yeah.
of people don't like doing that because they see that's conflict. But
Mm.
actually, if you have got that psychologically safe space where we can have conversations that matter, and someone is saying something, and you're like, "Oh, I'm not sure I feel okay about that." It's good, it's healthy, it's necessary to call it out in a really friendly way.
Yeah, we have to, Lisa. We absolutely have to. And I'm really pleased that you did that with your friend. And I've had two great content ideas from my conversation with you today. So I'm going to do a post on crying, because this is something now I still have a tendency when I feel myself about to cry to try and fight it back.
Mm,
Now I have a practice where if I'm watching a film or something and I can feel the lump coming up in my throat,
mm,
I just sit with it. I go, no, don't fight it. Just be with it, be with it, be with it. Let the tears come out.
mm,
Because I have been told since being a very young boy,
mm,
boys do not cry. Big boys don't cry. Man up. If people see men and boys crying, they don't want it. No, you mustn't cry. You mustn't cry. That's somehow weakness. Crying is a wonderful, natural process of letting go of our emotions, of processing something. We need to do it. And it frustrates me that I find it so hard to do it. I watch my wife, she'll deal with something something bad that's gone on. She'll cry. She's let it go. Whereas
mm.
me, I'm still holding on to it 2 weeks later because I haven't done that process of letting go, because it's been ingrained in me since I was young. Do not cry. And
And if
that's a
you,
terrible message.
yeah, it is. And if you don't let your emotions out, whatever those emotions are, if you don't recognize them and accept them and process them in whatever way feels right for you, and you end up holding on to them. And you made the reference earlier on about it can show in your skin. And so many people don't get the link. They're going back and forth to their doctors going, "I've got this rash on my arms," or "I've got this thing," and it's a physical thing. It's clearly nothing to do with my head. There's no way in a million years they would connect the two.
Yeah.
You're like, actually, tracking back in the last couple of months or year or whatever, there's often been something that's gone on, or it's just been building up. And the people have been holding on to all this level of emotional arousal, whether that's stress, depression, anxiety, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's level of emotional arousal that at some point your body can't contain it anymore. It has to have some
Yeah.
way of,
That energy has to go
yeah,
somewhere.
exactly.
And I'm going to go a bit into rubbishy type coach speak here, but I don't have the language to talk about this in any other way. But emotion is energy in motion.
Mm,
That energy has to go somewhere. So if something happens to you, there's stimulus, you have the emotion, and as I used to do, bury it, repress it, avoid it, escape it, anything but feel it or process it and deal with it. That's going to cause you physical problems. That's going to show up somewhere in your body. And again, the word disease is dis-ease. It means you're not at ease. So actually, a big, a huge amount of physical symptoms and problems are caused by poor mental health. And I think this is something, again, that people don't really understand. People don't, we have this health paradigm where we treat symptoms, Lisa, don't we? And we have these separate little boxes that we put things in. Oh, this is this problem, so you take this and this will make you better. And it's like, well, there comes a point, right, where we got to have a look and see what the root causes are. There's a quote by Desmond Tutu where it's up on my wall here. I'm going to read it to you. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream to find out why they're falling in. And when it comes to health, the reason a lot of people are falling in is their mental health. And things like man up and phrases like that, where we're not allowed to process our emotions or even understand our emotions. As a boy growing up, nobody ever taught me how to understand my feelings. Nobody taught me what they meant, what they were for. They're like lights on your car dashboard. Sometimes they're warning signs about something you need to look at. It's about something you don't want or you don't like, or you need to stop and you need to draw a boundary. And we absolutely have got to talk about this stuff. We absolutely have got to pull people up when we hear those kind of phrases, because we are just storing up trouble for the future. And because that's what happened to me, Lisa. That's why I ended up almost having a breakdown, is because I was just escaping and avoiding my feelings all the time and my emotions.
I think it's really interesting. So my kids are 11 and 13. Obviously, having me as a mum, as a psychologist, they are very familiar with emotions and how to deal with emotions and so on. But it's really interesting. So my 11-year-old son last night, he's going through SATs week this week at school, doing all their tests and everything. And we've been talking about anxiety and how to keep calm and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, he gets the Week Junior news magazine every week. And he was reading through that. And there was an article in there that was talking about emotional intelligence. And he's like, right, Mum, I'm going to test you on the 5 key areas of emotional intelligence. And we were just discussing it. And it was really interesting. I was saying to him that he's learning about this stuff and he's familiar with this stuff. But this is also the stuff that I last month was running a leadership workshop on emotional intelligence, helping the leaders understand a bit more about it and understand how to communicate better, differently with other people, whether it's in their personal relationships or at work, and different things to try out. And then they came back and were reporting back and saying, wow, actually most of them tried it out at home, interestingly. But it's something that actually our children are now learning about. It's the same stuff that we're also, I'd say, teaching, we're discussing, we're exploring, we're experimenting with in the workplace. But I think going back a few years, I don't know, probably maybe 5-6 years or so now, there was a really big kind of push around emotional intelligence. And, I remember doing loads of stuff with companies around that. And then suddenly that trend has moved on. We've moved on to another new thing. But actually, that's the stuff, that's the fundamentals of good mental health. And I think, I really liked when you talk about, and it's on your LinkedIn profile as well, about also authenticity. For me, that ability to have good communication skills, that to be emotionally intelligent, to be able to be authentic and very clear about how we want to show up and being able to show up in that way we want, how we want and what feels right for us. That is the key to good mental health. And it reminds me of a conversation I was having last week with Chris Chamberlain of Guernsey Mind about that connection between mental health and culture and leadership, and just giving people permission to think about how they want to show up and be self-aware and aware of each other and create space to do that. And it's all that is the stuff that people don't label as mental health, which for me are the key ingredients for good mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And emotional intelligence is key. And when I first stepped into leadership roles at the BBC, I did several leadership and mentoring type courses, and they were all about emotional intelligence, and that will have been 5-6 years ago,
Mm.
at least as you said. And that was the first time where I started to understand it, where I started to understand what active listening meant, where I started to understand how my actions could affect the feelings and emotions of others, and how other people's actions affected my feelings and emotions, and what I could do with that, how I could create space around stimulus and response, how I could stop, learned reactions, and in fact give myself the time to not be offended and upset by what people said, and understand what it was saying about me.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think that is the key when it comes to mental health, because again, part of the problems I had was I wasn't able to be my authentic self. And again, that it sounds like a lot of people don't really understand what being your authentic self is, but really when it just comes down, it's just being me. It's just being who I am. It's just being who I want to be in the world. When I was a young lad, I remember all I wanted to do, Lisa, was love everybody and everything as much as I could. That's all I ever wanted to do. And the world told me at every turn I couldn't do that. There were all these shoulds and have tos and musts that come with being a boy and therefore being a man. And so gradually, from that little 4 or 5 year old who ventured out into the world just wanting to love everyone and everything, I'm gradually moving steadily away from who I genuinely am. And then you go into adulthood and you start wearing masks and creating personas for each area of your life. Right, today I'm going to show up as this version of Dan Glyde with this mask on. I'm going to be BBC Sport Dan Glyde, and today I'm showing up as boyfriend and fiance Dan Glyde, or I'm stepfather Dan Glyde. And I had all these personas and flip me, is it exhausting to do that, to live like that? But that's how lots of people live their lives. And I think both men and women, for different reasons and in different ways, we end up sort of creating these people that aren't us. And then, but I think particularly as you get sort of over 35, you start going, actually, which one of these am I? Who the hell am I? And that creates a lot of mental health issues. A lot of my anxiety, I think, came from living in a way that wasn't authentic to me, trying to live at 100 mile an hour, trying to get success at the expense of other people, in competition for jobs and things like that. And that has always just sat very, very badly with me. I'm a
Mm.
collaborator. I want to help people. I want to serve people. But the world just kept telling me I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. No, it's a dog eat dog world, Dan. It's competition. It's survival of the fittest. And it always amazes me how much we've corrupted that survival of the fittest to mean survival of the biggest and the strongest and those that punch the hardest. No, that is not what Darwin meant.
So here's a question then. So, because you're talking about men being able to show up authentically. So I'm just thinking, as you were talking there, I was just thinking about that authenticity and also about emotional intelligence. So if you're a leader, about being able to have the conversations and you need to have with your teams and be able to support them in terms of where they're at. So in terms of me being my authentic self, if I am naturally a problem solver, so I'm not one of those people who's very good at just listening. I'm not very good at just allowing actually that space for the emotions just to be vented, not necessarily to be solved. And I'm bringing this up because this is one of the things that actually I keep coming across. So, and when I was doing this work with this leadership team, a number of the guys were saying, but we just tend to, we hear something from our wives or our
You want to
daughters.
solve it. Yeah.
And it's like,
that's me, Lisa.
I'm going to solve this problem. And it's like, no, you don't need to solve the problem. You just need to hear them. And then they can solve it themselves. Or they just don't want it solved. They just want to vent. But if their authentic self is, I'm a problem solver, I need to solve everything and then I feel happy.
Yeah.
And actually, we're asking people not to do that because they need to think about someone else's needs.
Yeah.
It was just something in my head thinking, actually, I guess there's a.
And it's a common problem, Lisa, particularly men. We are the guy with the hammer looking for the nails, and that's me. I am. I've strong feminine energy for a man, but actually, my masculinity leads me to want to solve problems. That's what we do. That's how we're wired. So, thankfully, my wife taught me this before I did leadership training. There are times where I don't want you to solve my problems. I want you to validate how I feel. I just want to get something off my chest. If I want your help, this is what she learned how to communicate with me. She said, I will literally say at the start of the conversation, Dan, I've got a problem. I want your help with this. If I don't say that, don't give me a solution. Just validate how I feel.
You know what? It's so familiar. That's exactly what I have to do with my husband. And my poor husband, for the last 13, 14 years I've been running my business, his name pops up in so many of my sessions about this is how my husband used to do it, and this is how he does it now, because he has learned that that's not actually what I want, or that's not what's needed in that situation.
Yeah.
And it's, but again, that comes back to, we don't know unless someone points out to us what they need of us, or what's helpful and what's not unhelpful.
Yeah. Well-meaning
We
advice.
don't know. There's always assumptions, and we just
Yeah.
assume everyone knows what everyone needs of each other. And it goes full circle back to what you were saying earlier about having the conversations, but spotting the signs, but also just having the conversations. And I'm a real fan of, I've produced a number of resources around normalizing the conversation around, what gets in the way of us being able to show up how we want to show up at work, what gets in the way of us being able to perform our best, and
Yeah.
actually just being able to say, well, it's actually workload, or it's I can't stand my colleague I work with, or I'm really anxious about this thing I've got to do and I don't really like doing whatever it is. And actually just beginning to make that as part of our normal conversation that we have week in, week out. And as soon as you start to have the conversations, people are much more likely to say, actually, I just want to share this with people because I'm just not sure what to do and I want your advice, or I'm just feeling a bit right now and I just want to offload it. Or people naturally start to share, I think, a bit more openly about
Yeah.
what it is they need.
Because and that's the thing. So I volunteer for the Samaritans, Lisa, and one of the things the Samaritans train you very very well at is how to actively listen.
Mm,
We can't give advice at Samaritans.
mm,
So because and the reason why people ring the Samaritans is because they know they're not going to be judged, and they know that nobody's going to give them well-meaning advice laden with assumptions coming from a point of view and a perspective, right? And it was a skill I'd already started to work on once becoming a leader at the BBC and then getting into coaching. And one of the reasons I went to Samaritans, as well as to give back and do something for the community, was because I knew that would train me to be an even better listener.
mm,
So, what you're alluding to there, it's all about communication and relationship. And, if you are a problem solver, which lots of blokes are, it's understanding when that is and isn't appropriate, and that you don't all, and coming from a place of vulnerability and understanding you don't have all the answers, and that actually you're not expected to have all the answers. And sometimes people will be coming to you just to have a conversation, just so you can validate how they feel, just so someone can really listen to them.
mm,
And active listening is a tremendous skill. And for those that don't know what that is, that's listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And that is something I had to work really hard at, Lisa, to learn. I was king of the relatable story. The minute someone's talking, I'm like, oh, I know what I want to say. I want to the point where I would talk over people, and especially women. I would talk over women all the time because I think I've got something more important to say. I'm trying to get my stuff out, and I'm not listening to anything anybody's saying to me. I'm not taking it in. I'm not. I'm a very compassionate and empathetic person. But if I'm not listening, how can I have compassion and empathy? Because I don't really know what's going on for that person. And, since doing that leadership training and working on my emotional intelligence and now being a coach where listening is absolutely vital to what I do, I listen not so I can understand, just so I can understand, but so other people can understand themselves. That's what
mm,
I'm here to do, right? And that's key in people in leadership positions, is to be able to actively listen, to really know what people are saying. Are they looking for support? Are they looking for advice? Or do they just want to tell you something and get it off their chest, and you can validate their feelings and say, yeah, that's okay. And then they go away and all they've done is just sat and had a 10-minute conversation with you. And that's all they needed. There's no
mm,
actions required. There's no support plan needed to put in place. They just
mm,
needed a conversation. And you're right. This needs to be normal. This needs to be a normal thing to happen at work, where we can just talk about the things that frustrate us, the things that get in our way, and we can learn to start putting other people first and other people's needs
mm,
first and other people's emotions first. If we all do that, Imagine what the workplace could be like.
And I think that's such a valid point about training people in active listening, because one of the fears I hear a lot from leaders and managers is, well, if I start talking about this stuff, I might have to solve whatever comes up. So I don't know what people are going to talk about. What if they say, and it's always this, what if that happens, or what if they say this, or the what ifs, and so they just don't say anything at all. And actually, when people are trained in really good active listening, and they're showing up to actively listen, not to try and solve anything or any other agenda. Actually, it's for them, it takes all the pressure off having to try and make this person better, having to fix this person. So whatever this person shares, suddenly I've got to do something with it. Actually, you need to be there to listen and to be by their side, and to have the conversation. You're not there as an expert trying to solve all their problems. And suddenly,
Yeah.
if we can get that message across, that takes a huge amount of pressure off, and reduces that fear in terms of I've got to suddenly be this mental health expert and solve all these problems.
No, just get in the well with them and say,
Mm,
okay, how can we sort this out together? What
yeah,
can we do? What support do you think you might need? What might help you? You're
yeah.
not, see, this is the thing. And I think, especially with blokes again, Lisa, and this is not, but it's not just men.
Mm,
Leaders think they have to have all the answers. They
mm,
think and I see a lot of bloke leaders who are pretending to be very knowledgeable because they think that's what people want, and they're trying to parent people, and it's like that's not
no.
what we want. We want somebody who we're going to get in the trenches with. We want somebody who's got our back. We want somebody we respect and we trust and respects and trusts us. That's what we want in leaders, not people that have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be aware of the direction in which you can point some people. So understand what resources are available to people. So if somebody does come to you and you think they really have got a significant problem, then get in the well with them and hold their hand. That's what empathy means. Don't look down in the well saying, "Oh God, isn't it terrible down there for you?" That nobody wants sympathy. Nobody wants well-meaning advice. But together, go and find what support they can get. Because
Mm,
there's loads out there. There are some wonderful charities, and the NHS supplies a lot of amazing stuff as well. And yeah, it is on leaders to understand where they can point people.
mm.
They don't have to have all the answers. And in fact, leaders who know they haven't got all the answers make the best leaders.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I like your what you just said about getting the well with them and empathy. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a really fab video that I used recently as part of this other workshop around getting in the well and what empathy means. Because that is a bit of an eye opener for some people. The fact that I can just get in the well and I don't have to solve the problems, but I just need to sit by this person
Yeah.
next to them. But I think, I also like, when you said before that about getting in the trenches, being with other people. um, I've run something with Gemma Ellison called Leadership Labs, which is essentially around leaders coming together and talking about challenges and creating experiments for addressing those challenges and going away and doing them and then sharing them as a group and problem solving as a group. And people in that environment take off their masks. So it's brilliant they come, they say, I'm just going to cry right now. Oh, I just need to say this, or I just need to have a rant, or I just need to whatever. I'm just going to take my mask off because I can be authentic here. I can just show up how I really feel rather than trying to keep the mask on for everyone else. And what's been really interesting in that space is that it's been predominantly women who have shown more emotion, although the male leaders in there will talk about the stuff. Um, it's been predominantly women. And I think what's been really interesting is that some of the guys in those groups have actually verbalized it pushes them out of their comfort zone. It feels slightly uncomfortable
Yeah.
being in a space with women who are potentially, or others, it doesn't matter if it's women or not, others who are showing their emotion quite openly.
Mm.
But they've also acknowledged that, and they've said it, and I love the fact that they've been vulnerable by saying, gosh, it makes me feel I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know what to do. But that vulnerability is brilliant because then we can help that person by saying, well, actually, you don't need to say anything, or you try saying this, or they're listening to other people responding and they're learning from what other people are doing to respond in terms of we're role modeling how potentially you can say things or do things in that space. So it's really interesting that whole when people are open to be stepping outside of their norm, outside of their comfort zone, and realizing that actually I do need to engage with this stuff out here. I do need to sort of be open to showing emotion and seeing emotion and dealing with that emotion
Yeah.
and just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, not expecting to get it right and saying, oh my
No.
gosh, I might get this wrong, but I just want to say, I really feel for you, or I might get this wrong, or I'm not sure how to say this, but what I'm trying to say is X, Y, and Z. And I think by having the right intention and communicate your intention, as long as you're doing that in a sympathetic way, you can't really go wrong.
Yeah, exactly that. As long as you just come from a place of love, that's
Yeah.
all you need to do is come from a place of love. Come from a place where of concern and understanding for that other person. Don't think you know what's going on. Don't assume you've got the answer or assume you know why they've got where they've got or assume you have the answer to their problem because we all know what happens when we assume.
Mm.
Just get in the well with them. Just sit alongside them, allow them to be themselves and talk how they want, talk about what they want to talk about and get what they want to get off their chest. And just be yourself. No, nobody's expecting you to be anything other than who you are.
Mm.
Just be yourself and come from a place of love and come from a place of understanding. And particularly for men, understand that that is not weak. It is immense strength.
And it gives permission for other people to show up authentically.
Exactly. Exactly. And if people start to understand you're not going to judge them, you're not going to immediately assume you know what's going on and then give them well-meaning advice. If they know you're not going to judge them, they will trust you. And if you trust them, that's a superpower. That's where magic can happen. If you have that sort of workplace culture where your leaders are trusted and respected, and your teams are trusted and respected too, and you have love and compassion and understanding and empathy woven throughout your culture where everybody supports everybody else.
Mm.
Nobody's there to judge, to point fingers, to blame, to cover their own butts. You're going to have a very, very successful company.
And that for me is the gold really in all this, especially as we think about mental health. It's actually thinking about all that stuff around compassion and love and care, empathy, and so on, which is actually what we need to feed good mental health. Not the
Absolutely.
not the kind of focus that some people have in terms of how to mend it when it's all gone wrong. So I love what you've just said. Daniel, I can't believe we've been talking for over 50 minutes. Um, you have given us loads of really good practical advice in terms of how to support good mental health, whether you're, I mean, particularly for males, but actually just across the board for everybody. What would be your specific advice, your specific sort of takeaways, if you like, that you would really encourage listeners to this episode to go away and think about differently? Because you've talked about active listening, you've talked about getting in the well, you've talked about looking for signs and so on. Is there anything else, or is
Well, I think what it is, Lisa, right? We're all, as a culture now, we're very good at looking after our physical well-being. We don't always get it right, but most of us know what we should and shouldn't be eating in terms of if we want to be well. We know that we need to be active and we need to be out and about. Your mental health is exactly the same. It's daily work to be mentally fit, right? So it's about knowing yourself and turning your attention inward. The world doesn't exist out there. It feels like it does. The world exists in here, in our minds, in our perception, right? And we get to control how we perceive things. And this blows people's minds when I tell them that. So go and read a book like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So this guy was in a concentration camp, but managed to, in his time there, learnt how he can choose how he sees what is happening to him, and therefore he can choose how he responds to it. Now, that is the key to being mentally fit. Having that, being able to cultivate that space between what he calls stimulus and response. It's responsibility, it's your ability to respond. When you react without thinking, without having that space, you're just bringing the past to bear on the now. You're making assumptions that you know what's going on. That is what causes poor mental health, when we exist in the past or we're worrying about the future. All that exists is now. And our power lies in turning our attention inward, in understanding who we are, why we react in the way we do, and putting that bit of space there so we can choose a well-reasoned response. That is good mental health. Anything else is poor mental health. And working on that will mean you are mentally fit. And treat your health holistically. You are a whole being. So treat every part of your nutrition, your sleep, all that stuff, that all contributes to good mental health as well as good physical health. It's all interlinked. But we do this thing where we put everything in boxes and we label it and we say, right, this is mental health, and so it's Mental Health Awareness Week, so we're going to talk about this, that. No, it's like it's all the same thing. It's all about being as fit and well as we possibly can. And in fact, the key to that is the mind, really. That's where it all comes from, is understanding your own mind and understanding who you are in relation to it. So I would encourage everybody to study themselves and understand themselves.
Brilliant advice. You've been as inspirational, Daniel, because
Thank you, Lisa. I love your
energy. I just love your you're so passionate about this, and it's clear that you are. I can imagine you coaching people, and actually just the fun, the buzz that would also come from it. So thank you so much for joining me and talking about this really important topic, which I think, when we're talking about men and we're talking about mental health and we're talking about authenticity, that's it's critical, it's key, it's what we really that's the connection that we really need to be focusing on, and as you say, like sort of joining all the dots and getting rid of these boxes. Anyone who knows me will know that I hate boxes, so I'm really glad you made that point. Thank you so very much. We will put your contact details in the show notes, resources and so on that we've been referencing throughout this, and maybe anything else that you've got to share, we'll also put those in the show notes. But thank you so very much for joining me today.
It's been a privilege, Lisa. Thank you very much for having me on and giving me a platform to spout all my stuff.
It's good stuff. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. What have you taken from it? What has it inspired you to think about or do differently? Please give the podcast a simple thumbs up on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'd be especially grateful if you leave a short review. It makes a real difference. If you join the club, you'll be the first to hear about relevant updates and free downloadable resources that are part of developing practice and performance. Do reach out to me directly to discuss your challenges at work. And if we're not already acquainted on LinkedIn, let's connect. All the links you need are in the show notes. Until next time, bye for now.